Hello, I'm Jason Lightoller from Woodside in Croydon. This afternoon I'm going to show you how to make this pullover hoodie. It's got a kangaroo style pocket at the front here, and it's got a hood with two pull cords, and it's a pullover hoodie that actually meets at the front. This is a request that came through after somebody had seen the video I made that was a jacket style hoodie that had a hood that did not meet at the front. This one is specifically designed to cover most of the face, whereas the previous hoodie I made only covered 3/4 of the face. This particular pattern is based on a standard jumper pattern, and it's got set-in sleeves, it's got a round shaped back neck, and you can adapt your own pattern if you want to. You don't have to use set-in sleeves, and you don't have to use sloping shoulders as this has got here. But the whole principle is exactly the same, and I'm going to show you how to fit the pocket and shape the neckline and attach the hood. So we're making the front part of the hoodie, and what I've done is I've knitted the 1x1 rib. You could of course use any other rib combination you wish, and I've transferred from the ribber up to the knitter, and what I'm going to do is just do one row straight across at main garment tension. And I need to make a note of the row number, and in this case it's row 33. What I'm going to do now is just cast the whole lot off on waste yarn. So the pocket that goes on the front of a pullover hoodie is called a kangaroo style pocket, and typically, although not always, it follows this particular shape. Essentially it's just a square piece of fabric that has the top two edges angled inwards, which will create a wider bottom edge and a shorter top edge. Sometimes you might see the bottom edge also angled in there. It's up to you whether you want to do that, although most of the time you see the two side edges straight here. Now for an adult, the top edge of the pocket is normally 22 centimeters in length, and the bottom edge is 36 centimeters. The total depth is normally 24 centimeters, and the two side straight edges are 10 centimeters. And my gauge is 29 stitches and 44 rows in a 10 centimeter square. Now that's important you know your gauge, because otherwise you might get a pocket that doesn't fit the sweatshirt, or one that is far too small that you wouldn't even be able to fit a matchbox in if you're not careful. Now I'm going to show you how to work out how many stitches and rows you need to make this pocket. It isn't difficult. As long as you've got a calculator and you take things step by step, you can actually get this pocket done in no time at all. So first things first, you need to work out how many stitches and rows you have in a 1 centimeter square. We already know what they are in a 10 centimeter square, so in order to do that you just put the decimal point in between these two numbers. But to double check that, all you do is put 29 divided by 10, and that gives you 2.9, and then you check your rows, which you put 44 divided by 10, which will give you 4.4. So I have 2.9 stitches and 4.4 rows in a 1 centimeter square. Now I need to work out how many stitches I need to cast on for this bottom edge here. So I know that I need to knit 36 centimeters worth of knitting. And to do that, what I'm going to do is to put 36 multiplied by 2.9. And that gives me a figure of 104. So I need to cast on 104 stitches. And I also need to know how many stitches I need at the top there, and that's important later to work out your calculations. So again, I'm going to put 22 multiplied by 2.9, and that gives me 63.8. So I'm going to round that up to 64 because I always prefer to work in even numbers. So I need 64 stitches at the top there. Now I need to work out how many rows I need totally for this pocket, and it's 24 centimeters worth of knitting. So what I'm going to do is put 24 multiplied by 4.4, which is my rows per centimeter, and that means I need 105.6 rows. Now obviously there is no occasion I can knit 0.6 of a row, so I'm going to round it up to 106 rows. And finally, for this part, I need to know how many rows I need for this 10 centimeter section here. So I'm going to put in 10 multiplied by 4.4. And that means I need 44 rows for this straight edge here. So we need to work out how to do these decreases up here. So first of all, we need to work out how many stitches shorter this section is to this section here. So we know that this is 104 stitches and this is 64 stitches. So what we do is we put in 104 and then we minus the 64 and that comes up with 40. So we've got 40 stitches and that's the difference. Now we need to work out the amount of rows we have to play with. So we know that we have 106 rows in total for the whole depth of the pocket. But now we need to work out how many rows we have from here to here. So just to make it easier, we'll just put a dotted line there. And then to do that, we're going to put in 106. And then we're going to minus the 44 rows from here to here. So 106 minus 44, and that equals 62. So from the top here down to where these decreases start is 62 rows. So that means that we have 62 rows to decrease 40 stitches, okay? Because the difference is 40 stitches from here to here. But we're going to be decreasing on each side. So we're going to halve that. So obviously half of 40 is 20. And all we do is we put in 62 and then we divide that by 20. And that comes up with 3.1. So that means that every 3 rows, 1 stitch, we're going to decrease. So decrease 1 stitch every 3 rows. Now, because of this 3.1, you might need to stop at row 60 and just check that you've actually got 64 stitches left. So when you get to row 61, make sure that you've just done a count. You might need to stop at row 61 or you might need to decrease another 2 stitches. So just to make that crystal clear, what I'm going to do is cast on 104 stitches. I'm going to knit up to row 44. Then I'm going to decrease 1 stitch every 3 rows 20 times. And then I'm going to cast off the remaining 64 stitches at the top. So the rib is done, and what we're going to do now is to start knitting the pocket. And I've taken the rib off the machine, and what I didn't say is that I put a yarn marker at the center of 0 just before I took it off the machine, because what we're going to do now is rehang the center 104 stitches of this ribbing here back onto the knitting machine. And that's the reason why I did 1 row of stockinette stitch, because that's a much easier way to rehang ribbing. And that's the 104 stitches. If you remember going back to the pattern, that is the amount we need to cast on to knit the first section of the pocket. So I'll get on with that now. So just to make it easier, you isolate the total amount of stitches you need. In this case, it's 104, so 52 either side of 0. So this is your 0 point. We've got 52 here and 52 here. You hang the center 2 that we've done here, that I've got with my yarn marker, and then you work from the inside out. So you can be sure that you've got 52 stitches from this edge and 52 stitches from that edge, and that will mean that you will not miss any as you pick them up. So I have checked and double checked that I have rehung the correct amount of stitches, in this case 104. I reset the row counter to 0 because we're now going to start to knit the pocket, and I'm going to run the carriage across again at main tension, and we're going to knit the first part of the pocket, which is the straight edge sides, and referring back to the pattern, that was 44 rows. So that's the first row done, and now we're going to do another 43 rows. So there we are, that's 44 rows in total. And now we're going to decrease 1 stitch every 3 rows starting on this row, and we're going to do that at each end of the pocket bag itself. So that's one end, and we're going to do this end, and then we will knit 3 rows. And we'll do another decrease, and we're going to do this 20 times. So there we are, that's the total knitting for the pocket complete. I've done my 20 decreases. I knitted up to row 106 as according to the pattern, and as we stated, there are 64 stitches left at the top of the pocket there. I've done some waste yarn knitting there, and I've done that, as I said before, 2 tensions tighter. So I'm going to remove this from the machine now, and I'll show you the next step. So what we've done is we've knitted the rib section of the hoodie, and we've knitted the pocket part of the hoodie. Now we need to knit the front part of the garment itself. And to do that, we need to rehang all this part back onto the needles, and the total number of needles that you cast on. In my case, for the total number of the rib was 168 stitches. So all this needs to go back onto 168 needles. So everything has been rehung back onto the needles, and I have double checked that every needle has got a stitch on it. I can't emphasize just how important that is. And if you don't do that and you go to take the waste yarn off, then obviously everything will run. And what I need to do now is just show you that, again, rehanging this back on is the wrong side facing you. If I lift the ribber comb up, that's the actual pocket there. And so I'm going to just put this in between the 2 beds, making sure that nothing is caught up, which it isn't. Let's just get all of this out of the way. And I've reset the row counter back to 0, because what we're going to do now is knit the main part of the garment. And we need to make sure that we're going to knit the same amount of rows as the pocket was in its entirety. So therefore, we're now going to knit 106 rows of the actual garment itself, and I've got the carriage set obviously at the proper garment tension. So I'm just going to make sure that everything has knitted off there and nothing is caught up. No, nothing is caught up. So now we're going to do the rest of that part of the garment, which is an extra 105 rows. So that's 106 rows of the main garment that I've knitted there. And now the last step is to rehang the pocket back on and knit it in for the rest of the garment. So what I've done is I've isolated actually the middle 70 stitches. Now, although that the top of the pocket is 64, I like to have just a little bit more room for play there. So either side I've isolated the remaining stitches, and I'm going to put the carriage into hold and just take this center part off in waste yarn. And I've just realized that one thing I forgot to do was to put a yarn marker here at 0. So just before I continue, I'm just going to zoom in. And I'm going to get the transfer tool and just put it underneath that row of waste yarn either side of the stitches of 0, and then we will just grab some waste yarn and put it through, because that's really important when you go to rehang that. So there you go. We'll just do that, and we'll just do a few more rows of waste yarn and then we'll take it off. So here's my waste yarn rows there, and what I'm going to do is just take that off the machine now, and then we'll pull the pocket through. So here's the pocket that we made, and I'm going to rehang these stitches here, and it's quite an easy thing to do. I'm going to rehang these stitches here, obviously lining the stitch marker up with the center 0, and then I'll show you what we do after that. So the pocket has been hung back onto the machine. All 64 stitches are in place. We don't need this middle marker anymore. The next stage is to rehang this section of the main jumper that we cast off on waste yarn just now, and obviously lining up the middle section again with the center 0. So I have rehung the center 64 stitches, and what I'm going to do now is just continue knitting the main part of the jumper. Before I do that, I need to reset the row counter. Now, If your pattern tells you to reset the row counter to 0 after you've done your rib, then all you need to do is reset it to row counter 001, because if you remember, we did the main rib and then 1 row of stocking net. However, my pattern doesn't actually tell me to do that. It tells me to continue with the rows after I've done the rib. In my case, the rib was 32 rows and I've done 1 row of stocking net. So that means I need to add 33 rows onto 106, and that obviously makes 139. So all I need to do now is to continue knitting from row 139 and continue with my pattern. Now, as this is the first row of the join, we need to go across slowly. And we just make sure that everything has knitted off. Yes, it has. And we'll just continue now until we get to the end of the front part of the jumper. So I have completed the front part of the garment, and what we need to do now is to remove the orange sections of waste yarn, and that's obviously at the bottom there, and from the top and from the inside of the pocket. So that's all the waste yarn removed. I've given this just a gentle pull into shape, and obviously it's just literally come off the machine now, so it's very misshaped. Later on, when we actually go to finish the garment, we'll be seeing to the side edges here and applying a trim to the slanted top parts here. Now the next thing to do is the back section and the sleeves, and you will do that according to what your pattern shows you. Now, in the instructions I gave you in the video for how to make an open hood for the jacket, I said you needed 2 measurements. I said that you needed one for the circumference of the head, and you also needed one for the depth. Now, for this particular hood, we don't actually need the circumference, because the idea of measuring around the head is so you know how far you need to bring the hood forwards. That's important if you're making a jacket style hood, because you don't want the hood to actually cover the whole of the face. However, this is a pullover, so that's the whole idea, is that most of the face will be covered, and there is no need to actually measure the circumference of the head in that instance. All we need is the depth of the hood, and as I previously explained in the other video, you go from the collarbone right the way over to the other collarbone here. You don't go from the shoulder to the shoulder, because if you do, once the hood is put on the garment and the person goes to wear it, the gorge point, which is another name for the throat point here, will be halfway up the person's neck, and it could be very uncomfortable to wear. So all you do is you take your tape measure and you go from the collarbone right up close to the neck, all the way round and right over there again, and I've got a total amount of 76 centimeters there. I'm going to add 3 centimeters ease, and that makes a total of 79 centimeters. So as this hood is going to be a wrap over hood rather than a hood that stops at 3/4 of the facial depth, we're only going to be needing the amount of rows for the depth. Now in total, the hood measured 79 centimeters for the depth of the hood that we need, and we're going to be doing that in 2 halves. So 79 divided by 2 gives us a total of 39.5. I'm obviously going to round that up to 40, and my gauge was 4.4 rows to each centimetre. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that by my gauge. So 40 multiplied by 4.4 gives me a total figure of 176. Therefore, I need to knit 176 rows to make this hood. So now we need to make the hood, and what I've done is I've joined one shoulder and I've hung the neckline up against the gate pegs on the knitting machine, and I've applied some stretch, not too much but just a little bit here, just so that it's not sagging in between. You do need some stretch there so you can ensure that the hood is not too tight. Now I've used a cut and sew method for this neckline. I can't remember the last time I did a fully fashioned neckband. I find cut and sew much more versatile than any other way of shaping a neck, and if you don't know how to do that, then I have already done videos on cut and sew for various different methods. If you don't want to do the cut and sew method, then you may need to adjust your pattern, but you do need a deeper than normal neckline. So for this garment, what I did is I cut the neckband to a depth of roughly 10 centimeters, and you need a width of 24 centimeters front and back. The back neck I have shaped to a depth of 2 centimeters. So that is roughly the guidance that you need for an adult hoodie. So as this is stretched out quite comfortably, I can quite clearly see that I need to cast on 130 stitches for this hood, and we need, as I said before, to knit 176 rows. So as you can see, I've got some waste yarn here and a few rows of main knitting. Now, whenever you're casting on with waste yarn, or if you're casting off with waste yarn, make sure you do at least 10 to 15 rows, a good generous amount. Don't use 3 or 4 rows. I once saw somebody do 2 rows of waste yarn cast off, and honestly my heart nearly went into fibrillation when I saw that. And the reason why I've done this extra rows here, and this is actually 10 rows, before I reset the row counter to 0 to start knitting the amount for the hood, is because we're going to be using the overlocking machine to apply this hood, and we need a margin between the waist and the actual main knitting to cut away. So that's why this extra set of rows is here. So I've reset the row counter to 0, and what I'm going to do is knit up to row 156. And the reason why I said row 156 is because we're going to apply some shaping to the crown to stop the inevitable point that you actually get. So we're at row 156. I put a yarn marker at the center point of 0, and all the needles left to 0 I put in hold. I'm going to set the carriage to hold because what we're going to do is now shape the top of the crown. And what that will do is cause a gentle curve. And for the next 20 rows, we're going to decrease 1 stitch this side by using short rows. And all short rows is otherwise known as partial knitting, means that the machine will knit up to here, where I've actually put the needles into the hold position, and go back. It will then knit forward up to here and go back. Even if I pass it right up to the other end of the bed, it doesn't matter. It will only knit as far as the needles are in the hold position. So when you actually do any shaping in hold position, you must make sure that you hold the knitting firmly against the needle bed, otherwise the stitches could jump off. So we're going to make the first pass now, and then we're going to bring that needle into hold, and that will create the wrap. Then the next needle, and then the next needle, and we do this for 20 times because we want to get up to row 176. I'm going to be doing this off camera. So that's my 20 decrease stitches done. What I didn't say to you is that as you're decreasing, you need to put a claw weight on there, and that will also help to reduce the stitches jumping off the needles. Now what I need to do is knit right the way across the whole length of the bed, and to do that we need to take the carriage off hold and just knit across. And now we're going to put all the stitches right of 0 into hold position. We'll reset the counter to 156 and we will repeat the process. So that's these decreases done now. What I'm going to do is take the carriage off hold again and once more knit right across. And then we will remove the top of this on waste yarn. So this is the top section of the hood, and this is the cast off edge on waste yarn, and obviously this is the yarn marker here. Now we're going to join these two edges together, and the way to do that is you literally just join these live stitches up against one another, and you would fold it in half at the yarn marker there, and then you just join those two edges and remove the waste yarn. What method you use is entirely your choice, of course. I have done a video on joining knitwear by machinery, and I have shown various different methods. So it's up to you which method you use to join this, but I'm going to get that done now and then I'll show you the next step. So here is what the hood looks like so far. Just to draw your attention to the crown, it's rounded at the back rather than just going straight across there. If you did that, you get a really unsightly point, as I demonstrated in the other video that I showed you. I go into much more detail than that. So the next thing to do is the casing that runs right the way around the outside of the hood. But we need to do this in two halves because we can't, as this is now a circular garment, we can't actually put this and stretch it out along the knitting machine. So we'll knit one half and join it, and the other half and join it. So the easiest way to do that, just as before, is if we hang the edges against the gate pegs. And you do need to apply some stretch to this. You don't want this to actually fit snugly. It does need to be stretched a little bit. And what you do is you start where the center seam on your hood is, and you go right the way down to where your waist yarn is, and you measure that. Now, according to this, I need to knit 135 stitches, and I'm going to do that, and I'll show you how many rows I've done. So what I did is I cast on in waste yarn, which you probably can't see very well because the ribber here is in the way. I cast on in waste yarn, and I knitted 10 rows at garment tension because I wanted a band that's 2 centimeters in depth, and that's roughly what my gauge equated to. And then I did a fold row, and I knitted another 10 rows at tension -2. So this was number 6, and then the remaining 10 rows after the fold row was at tension 4, and then some scrap yarn here. Now, as you can see here, what I did is I made an eyelet, just a single eyelet, and I did that 20 stitches from the end of the band, and that's so we can pull some slip cord through just before we seal the band up. And when you do that, you must remember that when you do one at this end, so the left hand side, you need to reverse it and do one at the right hand side, because if you don't do that and you do 2 eyelets at the left hand side, when you put the band on, what will happen is that you'll get one eyelet on the inside and one on the outside of the garment, so it just won't work. And what I'm going to do now is just take this off the machine and apply it to the hood. So just before I'm going to put the bands on the side of the hood, I've put a metal eyelet. You can use a plastic one if you want to, but I didn't have any plastic ones. I've only got metal left. I've put a metal eyelet over the knitted eyelet that I made in the band, and that's what it looks like on the inside. And it's important that you put some type of protection over that, because as the cord comes through the knitted eyelet, if people are going to actually pull the hood taut, many people don't, it's just there for decoration, but if people are going to be using this for its intended purposes and you don't have this reinforcement there, what can happen is that as the cord actually pulls against the knitted eyelet, it will wear away and the eyelet can become bigger and eventually the knitting will rip. So what I've done here is I've hung the edge of the hood, the side edge of the hood, starting from the center seam here, right the way down to where the waist knitting starts at the bottom of the hood, over the same amount of needles that we made the band. And all I've done is go literally in the very first, I'll just zoom in so you can see, and all I've done is literally go in the very first part of the knitting, so in the very first column there, as you can see. So what we're going to do now is rehang the band onto the knitting. So the right side of the hood is facing me, and I'm going to put the right side of the band against the hood. And do make sure that when you hang the band on, you've got the eyelet at the very edge of the hood here. So this is the edge of the hood, the other end is the center seam. And this section of the band that we knitted is the one that was done at garment tension. This is the fold row, as you can clearly see, and here is the rows that were done at main tension -2. And that's really important because otherwise it won't fold out right. So I'm going to get all these stitches on and then I'll show you how to do the next step. So I have checked and double checked that all of these stitches are in the hooks and I have not missed any, which I haven't. And I'm just going to go across with the credit card routine, expired credit card routine, and just close all of these latches, because what we're going to do is pull these stitches through that edge of the fabric there. So just make sure that they're all closed. We might need to do that a couple of times, so make sure that everything is shut and steady the latches here because they do have a tendency to open out. So keep going all the way along. So when you're halfway and the latches can no longer open back out, you just pull all those stitches through like that. You go all the way along until you get to the other end, And then what you do is you hold the band down and you bring them all forward again, because we're going to encase the edge there with the rest of the stitches. So what we're going to do now is hang this edge on to the needles, and then we will bind off. So that's all the stitches back onto the needles now, and what I'm going to do is just pull all these needles forward again, and then we're going to just cast off. Don't be tempted to pull this row of stitches that you've just hooked onto the needles through the last set, because although there is one way of casting off, if you do that, it actually gives a much tighter edge, and that's not what we need for this particular part of the process. So now the carriage is threaded in main yarn, and I've got it at the loosest tension, tension 10, and what I'm going to do is 2 passes. And now that's knitted through, what we're going to do is just cast off. Now there are many different ways to cast off. There's lots of videos out there that show you how to do it. This is just a favourite way of mine. It's the latch tool method, otherwise known as the loop through loop. And I actually use this way because I find it's the most stretchiest. If you use the gate peg bind off, it actually produces quite a lot of holes around every stitch, and I find it's quite a rigid cast off. This one is quite loose, and it really is helped by doing the last 2 rows at tension 10, the loosest tension, and this way doesn't actually give me any problems at all. Now the method in which you use to do the latch tool bind off, again there are variances on that. This is just mine. So this is the side edge band of the hood on. As you can see, it's lying nice and flat here, it's not flaying out at all, and that's because this side was done at garment tension, and on the inside this was done at garment tension -2. And as you can see, it's very neat, the edge is very stretchy, and the eyelet there will be used when we put the slip cord through. Now what we're going to do is just do the same again on the other side and reverse the process. So that's the hood made, and everything is done for it now except for the top seam join, of course, where the 2 bands join at the top, which we'll see to later. We can't do that now until the slip cord has gone through and has been pulled through these 2 eyelets here. Now what we need to do is to mark the centre back of this hood, and also mark the centre back of and the centre front of the jumper itself around the neckline. So to do that, it's just a matter of bringing both edges of the hood together. So you're bringing the 2 bands together, make sure that the 2 joins are lined up, and you just go across. You don't have to be too precise about getting it to match exactly. As long as the front edges here are aligned, just go across and keep it straight if you can, and eventually you'll come to a crease here. So where the back is folded there, just like that, you take some chalk or any other marking device you want to use and put it in the crease line there, and just make a mark. And that here is your centre back. So now you elongate it by just making a mark like that. So we know that that is the centre back of the hood, and we're going to do the same for the actual jumper itself. So for the jumper, it's the same principle. You bring the shoulder seam to the shoulder seam there, and you just make sure that both the shoulder seam matches, and then you put a chalk mark there in the centre back, and you do the same, exactly the same for the front. So if I just put one there, it's just a small one there, and then there it is. We can elongate it just so we know we've got some markers. And what we'll do now is do the same for the front, and again shoulder to shoulder, so that shoulder seam to match up with that one, and we'll just put a mark there in the crease. Now you would of course be doing this on a flat surface, but there's the shoulder, there's the halfway mark there. Now ordinarily you would be putting these in before you take them off the machine, but I forgot, as we sometimes do, and this is quite an acceptable way to do it. Now what I'm going to do is join the remaining shoulder of the jumper, and then we're going to attach the hood. So the remaining shoulder seam has been joined, and I've turned the jumper inside out, because what we're going to do now is join the hood. We're going to pin the hood first, right sides together, and we're going to match the centre back marking of the hood here to the centre back mark of the jumper neckline, and at the centre front marking of the which I think you can just see here, the centre front marking of the front neckband on the jumper, we're going to cross the bands over. So everything is pinned into place now. I've matched the centre back seam up of the hood with the centre back seam of the jumper there. And at the front, what I'm going to do is just show you how we dealt with the overlaps there. So this is the centre front marking of the jumper, and this is one edge of the hood. So this is the band, one edge of the hood. And what I did is I put the join of the band up against the centre front marking of the jumper there, and I've overlapped the other side of the hood up against the same centre front marking there. So it just means that those two edges of the hood there, these bands overlap one another, and these two joins are in the dead centre of the jumper. It doesn't particularly matter which side overlaps. Now there should be no fullness to ease in, or extremely little fullness to ease in, when we're at the overlocker, because if you remember, the hood was actually matched up to the exact diameter of the neckline itself. And what we're going to do is just go over to the overlocking machine, and we're going to put the blade right up against this line of overlocking stitches here. And obviously we're going to be keeping the top edge of the overlocking right up against the first row of main hood stitches where it joins the waist yarn. And what that will do, it will cut away the waist yarn. At the same time, it will be removing the excess main garment yarn that we used for the hood, if you remember, just before we knitted the 176 rows. So we're at the overlocking machine now, and we're going to attach the hood in an entire circle. And as I said before, we're going to be keeping the blade right up against the lower portion of this overlocking thread from the cut and sew neck. And as we go round, we'll be doing this in short, steady bursts. We will not be using this at the speed of lightning. You don't need to rev the machine up. Now I'm starting at the centre back. You can start at any point you want to. It doesn't particularly matter, because what we're going to be doing is applying some twill tape a little bit later on, just to give it some extra strength. So again, just short bursts, and keep everything aligned up. And make sure that everything is flat. One thing I haven't mentioned is that the differential feed is set just over 1.5 and the stitch length is at 2.5. It's important to have those measurements there, because the differential feed will ensure that the neckline doesn't stretch and go out of shape. Now when you get to the overlap here, make sure that everything is flat and everything is in place as it should be, and just go straight across. Don't stop and start for that part. So we're coming up to the final part of it now. We're just going to go right across this last section here. And that's it. So this is the hood that has been attached. What we're going to do now is to put some twill tape over this overlocking on the inside. So we're going to add some twill tape around the neck edge of where the overlocking is. And if you've not seen twill tape before, this is exactly what it is. It comes in different widths and it comes in different colours. This width is 1.5 centimetres, what I'm using today. And the two fundamental types of twill tape is the soft herringbone one, which is this one, or the canvas type. You shouldn't really use the canvas type for this particular project because it doesn't have the flexibility Now, some people always use tape if they're applying a neckband to a sweater using an overlocker. I must say, if I'm using the overlocker to apply a neckband, I don't bother. I only ever use tape to go around the neckband with the overlocking machine if I'm making a hoodie such as this. And the reason being is because that if the hood is not being worn, or even if it is being worn, it tends to have some tension applied like this, and the tape just gives it some extra stability. So I've got the jumper turned inside out and I've turned the hood inwards, and what we're going to do is go back to the overlocker and apply the twill tape all the way around the edge of the hood. What I did is I measured all the way around the circumference of the hood opening, and I took the same measurement plus 10 centimeters against the length of the tape just to allow for stretch. So starting at the shoulder seam, it doesn't matter which one, we're going to apply the tape directly underneath this seam here, and it's got to be underneath this line. Don't put it against the edge of the overlocking there, because the tape will be too narrow. You've got to apply it directly underneath this seam, and we're going to go all the way around, because the blade of the overlocker is going to be removing this edge here, and it's going to be catching the tape edge here. And you don't need to worry about that, because if you remember, we added the extra rows of the hood in the margin between the waist yarn and the 176 rows, and that's the reason why we do it. So we're going to have a nice clean cut edge there, and this tape is wide enough to be secured in with the overlocker. So just to highlight that, if you have this outer marking lined up against the edge of the over edge seam here, it will only remove this part. It won't cut away any of the tape, because this marking denotes the blade edge itself. It denotes the cutting edge. This marking denotes the right needle, and this is the left needle. So therefore the tape will only be caught up in the seam by the two needles here, and that would be more than enough to turn over and secure. If this tape goes over towards the right hand side like that, then some of it will be cut away, of course. So therefore just make sure that it's just slightly to the left of this marking here. You must make sure that the left needle is threaded up with thread that matches the colour of the garment. I've left the differential feed at 1.5, but I've increased the stitch length to 3.1. And even more so in this particular case, it's imperative that you go in short bursts and at a slow pace, because you really don't want to be removing any of this tape. So we're coming up to the overlap here, and just as before, it's important that you have everything flat and lined up correctly, and you go across in one movement rather than stopping and starting. So we're coming up to the end here, and one thing I didn't say to you at the start is that just before you begin your seam, you fold towards you 1 centimetre or so of the tape, so you can actually turn it over flawlessly. And therefore that's important that you do that at the end. You actually fold 1 centimetre of tape so it overlaps here, and you fold it away from you, and you then just carry on sewing, and then you then switch it away. So that's the tape in place. We're now on the wrong side of the garment, and what we're going to do now is secure this edge down. I've given this a generous shot of steam all the way around on the inside and the outside, and that is very important because you want this seam to lay flat. What we're going to do now is go over to the sewing machine, and we're going to secure this edge of the tape to this side of the garment. So this goes to the garment edge, and we're going to move this down, making sure that this seam is totally flat there and there is no puckering or build up like that. You can put pins in if you want to, just to secure it down, and then you're going to secure with a normal straight stitch all the way along this edge, all the way around, making sure that this colour on the top here is threaded up with grey in the needle, and your bobbin is threaded up with blue that matches this, because the blue will be showing on the right side of the garment. Your sewing machine should be set at a straight stitch of around 3.5 millimeters. So just to illustrate that, what I've done is I put some pins directly in the edge here where the seam is that we've sewn, and I've kept this edge free. Of course, we're going to remove these as we go around, and we'll be starting at the shoulder point. And we'll be securing this edge, as I said, directly to the garment edge here. And we'll be getting on with that now. So removing the pins as you go, keeping right up close to the edge as possible. And as I say, I've got the stitch length at 3.5 and the dual feed is engaged. Now the dual feed means that it will be feeding the fabric from the top of the machine as well as underneath. If you don't have a dual feed on your machine, it's not the end of the world. You can still do this perfectly evenly by using just a single feed machine. It just means that you might need to adjust the pressure from the presser foot here. So you might want to put this on perhaps 1. And you go around at a slow, steady pace, even more slowly this time, and always ensure that your bobbin thread matches this perfectly. Now when you go around, make sure that not only are you keeping the tape flat, which it should be if you've pinned it in place properly and you've given it some steam as I showed you earlier, but also you're keeping the front part of the garment flat and the back section here. Now here's the lapped part of the hood. Now we don't need to worry about keeping this lined up as we did when we put the tape on, because the seam has already been sewn to secure the tape and attach the hood at the same time. All we're doing here is securing this edge of the tape down, but nonetheless it's important that you still go over in one steady line. Don't go over and start and stop. Now when you come up to the final part, make sure that both ends of the tape are in line with each other. You might need to just ease them in a bit with a small pair of scissors or a bodkin. Make sure obviously you don't catch them in the head of the needle. Just go straight across, reverse back with 2 or 3 stitches, and that's that. So this is the twill tape that's in place here. As you can see, it goes all the way around on the inside of the hood and all the way around to the front here, and it joins back up there. And on the outside, this is what it looks like. It's a very neat line of top stitching that comes all the way through, and it's hardly conspicuous because we've used a very good matching thread color. Now the next thing to do is to make the slip cord that comes through and goes through the eyelets here. Now slipcord is commonly known as I-cord, but I don't like using that term because of the connotations of what it actually means. And all that is you knit in one direction and slip in the other. Now what we're going to do is measure from here all the way around the outside of the hood to here, and we're going to knit the same length accordingly. So let's see what we've got, and let's keep going. We've got 88 centimeters, so I need 88 centimeters worth of slipcord, but obviously we need a little bit longer than that, so I'm going to give an extra 30 centimeters because I want 15 centimeters each side. So I need 118 centimeters worth of knitting. So don't make the slipcord too wide because it needs to be wide enough just to come through here, so probably no more than 4 needles wide should be more than enough. So I have already started some slipcord here and I've got it going over 4 needles. The machine is set to slip in one direction and knit in the other, and what that will do is it will create this cord effect. And as I say, no more than 4 needles depending on the size of your eyelet. If your eyelet is smaller than that, then you might need to do 3. But you wouldn't want to do anything less than 3 because otherwise it will not curl round. So you just keep going across backwards and forwards until you've got the desired length that you need. What I didn't tell you is that I started off with 2 rows of stockinette stitch before I actually changed to slipping in one direction, and there is a claw weight at the end of this slipcord, and I've got it knitting at 1 tension lower, so it's 1 tension tighter. So in this case, instead of 6, it's at 5. Now when your claw weight reaches the floor, as this one has, then you must of course move it up. There we are, that's 118 centimeters worth of cord. You don't have to be too precise about that regarding gauge and row measurements. You just use a tape measure and you measure it up against the actual cord that you've knitted, and you don't stretch the cord when you do it. And the last 2 rows, you take it off of slip and you do 2 rows of stocking net at the loosest tension, tension 10. Because what we're going to do now is, because we're going to cast off using the latch tool method and leave a tail of yarn probably about 10 centimeters. So that's the slip cord here. Now for the purpose of this, we do need the fibres to be flat because it's going to be used as a drawstring. So what I'm going to do is take the steaming wand and just give it some steam here. Quite a liberal amount, and you can just move it around, just turn it over like that. Just give it some steam. You don't have to go too vigorous with this, but just go backwards and forwards, and then you can bunch it up like that. You don't have to make sure that every part of every circular part has been covered. And then what we're going to do is just stretch it, and then that will be enough. So there we are. Now you get hold of the 2 ends like that and just give it some tension. So there we are, that's the slip cord now all ready to go through the hood. So in order to get the cord through the hood casing, you need to do it in 2 halves. It's much easier to do it in 2 halves, which is why you couldn't join the top 2 until you've done this part, as I explained earlier. I've already done one side, so I'm just going to explain how you do it. What you do is you're going for the good old-fashioned safety pin method, and you tie the extra length of yarn that you've left after you finished your slip cord to the outlet there of the safety pin, and you just slip it through the casing and you feed it all the way down. You keep going until you get way past the eyelet that you've made, and what you do is you look out for the float. So you look out for that particular length of yarn there that we tied on, and then you take, what I find easiest is if you take a seam ripper. So I'll show you what I mean. You take a seam ripper, and if I just zoom in there, you can see it, I think. There. You just take a seam ripper, you go take the safety pin past the end of the eyelet, just past it, so you know that it's attached to that part, and there is the length of yarn there, just there. And then you take a seam ripper, make sure you only take that part of the yarn, and you're not taking any part of the casing itself, and you gently lift it through. So what I'm going to do is just gently lift this yarn through, and then you use that as leverage to pull through your cord, and just pull gently on the cord and move the casing backwards, and you will be able to pull your slip cord through as we've just done there. And then all you do is you take your scissors and snip off that bit, which we'll see to in a moment, and then feed the pin back through the other way. So here we are, we're coming up to that part, that's the pin there, and now what we're going to do is just close this end off here. So to do that, first of all, what we're going to do is just pull the cord tight, and we don't want to loop there because there's a risk that you will catch the cord in your seam. So just pull that taut like that, and then what we're going to do is just tidy up these threads here. Then what we're going to do is just tidy up these threads here, and then what we're going to do is use this length of yarn here to join this section all the way around and up to there, making sure obviously that we don't catch the cord in the seam. So making sure that there is no tension applied to the casings at all, and that both ends of the cord are equal length, you just literally tie a knot in the cord there and you pull tight, because that will stop it from slipping through the eyelet there, and you do the same with the other side, but obviously you want to make sure that you've got the knot in the same place. So the next thing to do is to finish off the pocket on the front, And first of all, we're going to secure the side seams, and then we're going to add a trim to the angled sections at the top there. But before I do that, I'm going to give the front part some steam, because that does help and it does need it before you actually do those parts. So we're at the linking machine now, and what I've done is I've put onto the point ring needles here the exact same place, the starting place where we hung the pocket on, the kangaroo pocket. So this is the kangaroo pocket and this is the garment front. Now if you don't have a linking machine, you can obviously put this down by hand, or you could use a flat sewing machine with a very short stitch, a stretch stitch, not a flat stitch. It has to be a stretch stitch because this needs to stretch with the machine stitches. So you hang an excess amount of the garment front onto the point needles, and now what we're going to do is put the pocket edge onto the point needles as well. So I've hung the pocket edge onto the pins as well, and we're going to join it in a moment. And of course you start at the very edge of where your angled point starts there, and then you just put it on, and of course you always go beyond the end of where your linking needs to finish. So everything is in place. We're now going to start the linking process, and regardless of what type of linker you use, whether it's this drum type mechanism or any other type of mechanism you've got, you never want to rev your machine. It needs to be at a steady pace, because otherwise sometimes the stitches won't form. And as always, you go beyond the end of your linking because we're going to chain back. So there we are. Here is the edge that we've just sewed down. We're going to do the other side, and then we'll put the trim on that part there. So what I've done is I've just put the very edge of the pocket opening back onto the knitting machine. And as you can see here, it's just the very edge of the pocket itself. There's none of the actual knitting that's been taken up there. Now we're going to put some ribbing as a trim. You don't have to use ribbing, you can use whatever trim you want to use, but you do need something along the edge, because otherwise it will continue to curl in and it will represent a weak point. Now if you do choose to use a rib as your trim, then make sure that your configuration is the same as the welt at the bottom of the garment. I've got a 1x1 combination, so that's what I'll be doing here. And you don't have to use that. As I say, you could use slip cord, you could use just a plain hem. The choice is entirely down to you. So I'm going to knit across here in one row of stockinette stitch, because what I want is to be able to transfer in a 1x1 configuration across to the ribber. And I'm going to do that at a tension, one tension looser than what my main rib tension was. So in this case, it's stitch size 5. Because this rib, you do need to be able to stretch it, because it needs to actually elongate across the pocket opening. However, it's of vital importance that you do not stretch this edge when you put it onto the needles. It must not be stretched, because the pocket will go out of shape and it will notice. So here we go with the first row. And now what I'm going to do is just get the ribber set up, and then we will transfer the stitches across. So just before I get the ribber set up, I just wanted to illustrate here that I put a triangle weight in place, and attached to that, which you can just see the tip of there, I've put a 400-gram weight, ribber weight. And that's really, really important, because ribbing does need a lot of weight there to hold it in place. And you do it at this point, because otherwise you won't be able to do it once the ribber is set up and ready to go. So what I've done is I've moved the 1x1 rib configuration forward, because I'm transferring the knitted stitches over to the ribber, and obviously the purl stitches are going to be done on the ribber. And I'll just get these moved across, and then we'll start the rib trim off. Now you need to take your time when you're transferring from the knitter to the ribber. It's not a usual thing that people do. So you really don't want to rush this part. So just take your time, and eventually you will get there. It's not many stitches. It will probably take less than 60 seconds or so. There we are. We're just going to make one final check that all the settings are correct. The tension is as I stated, and we're going to knit 8 rows at this tension. Now what we're going to do is go to 2 tensions looser, so that's tension 7 in this case, and we're going to do 1 more row. And now we're going to transfer all the ribber stitches up to the knitter. Now ordinarily you might be able to go a little bit quicker with this if you're transferring perhaps welt stitches up, but remember that this has been done on the last row at quite a loose tension, so you may be at risk of dropping the stitches here, so just take your time as you did before. There we are, all the stitches are transferred across. I'm going to remove the weight now and the triangle comb, and what I'm going to do is just move all these stitches back into the hooks because we're going to use the latch tool bind off method here. So here we are, we'll just do the latch tool bind off. Don't be tempted to do one final row of stocking stitch just before you do this latch tool bind off, because you do need this as loose as possible. And you just bind off all the way along the row until you get to the end. And here we are, this is the edge of the ribbing that we've just done here. We'll see to these parts right at the end when we do the very final finishing off. And that's why, as you can see, that it's quite a stretchy rib that we need there. So we'll secure that down just later and we'll tidy up this edge here. And now what I'm going to do is just put the final part on there off camera. There we are, that's both sides complete, and as I said, what I will do is, before the jumper is finally finished, we'll just secure these ends in there. Now the last thing to do is to put the sleeves on and sew up the side seams. So here is the front pocket finished, the kangaroo pocket. What I did is I just turned the inside here inwards, so it's actually in line with the side edge here. And if I just move this across, you'll be able to see it easier. And obviously the top part was just backstitched down there, and on the inside here, as I said, I stitched it down. You don't have to do that, but it looks a lot neater if you keep it in line with the side edge here. If you didn't, then what would happen is that it would splay out to the side and it would look quite untidy. So here is the finished pullover hoodie from the front. This is one of the side openings for the kangaroo pocket, and here is the other. This is the hood without the drawstrings pulled taut, and if you start to pull them, as you can see, it begins to shape the hood to the head of the person. This is what it looks like from the front with the hood in place, and this is what it looks like with the hood down. And from the back, this is what it looks like with the hood folded down and with the hood up. As you can see, we've got a nice shaped neckline there, and because we did the short rows, we don't have that traditional point that would come up like that if we didn't do the short row shaping. And if I just turn that round and then just remove the hood, it looks just as good as anything you would buy in the shops.